Wai Chiap, Wai Haskokwas, Piayatsui, in Chai Squeeze Dinamation, in Sukanakin Ko Inkamapala, Talikin Limp Apanas Ko Health Puigam, Tu Kuskwa Alta, E Seal, Ult E Timpulau, Ult E Timu, Lim Lim Kulan Shootin to Apanas Health. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. My name is Dina Machin. I'm a community member from the Seal Station, and I'm calling in from my home community in Kamapalux, or Okanagan Indian Band at Head the Lake near Vernon. We're really happy to see everybody today and have you join us for a webinar on project management. Just to let you know that we are recording the Zoom, and the Zoom will be available on our YouTube page probably within a week or so of the webinar. So if you've missed anything, you can always go back and have a look at the Zoom recording if you're looking for any kind of information. We're kind of in that period, winter time, colds are setting in. Hopefully my voice kind of holds out for the morning. So encourage everybody to kind of take care of yourselves as you need to. Tea, coffee. If you want to keep your camera off, that's fine. So as I said, we'll be recording the webinar, but when we get into the discussion portion, we'll turn the recording off just to protect the privacy of any of the discussion that we might have and the questions that are asked and the communities that are present on our Zoom today. So with that, Gina, if we can get started with the presentation. And I just encourage everybody that if you have any questions or comments, just to put them into the chat. And then once we get into the discussion, we'll have those conversations. So today on the for the presentation for the webinar, our objectives really are to provide a really brief overview of project planning, management, and administration. And we understand that everybody is coming to us with different experiences and different types of projects. And, you know, you can take training or a lifetime of training in project management, courses and training that last like 3 or 4 days. So really what we're going to do in an hour is really just give you a very brief overview with some software and tools that we've used and some experience from our guest presenter today that's going to share different approaches for as practitioners and people that are working on projects, just strategies and tools that we use to kind of keep ourselves on track and to manage our projects. We'll be talking about finding systems and tools that work for you and how to enhance the coordination and communication across your project teams. So when we get into the presentation, our agenda today is to have a presentation from Robin Annschild, our guest presenter on project management for watershed restoration. We'll be discussing project management, planning, and budgeting. And then we'll get into some tips, tricks, and tools that we use. And then hopefully we'll have time, at least 20 minutes or so, we're hoping for discussion before the webinar will end at 11:30. So our speakers today, as I had mentioned, Robin Annschild, the founder of Rewilding Water Earth. Myself, Dina Machin, Senior Indigenous Advisor with the Indigenous Watersheds Initiative, and my colleague, Claire Sauvage-Mar, Program Associate with the Indigenous Watersheds Initiative. Also on the call today are our IWI project team who are helping to support in the background, and we'll probably meet some of them in the discussion today. Our co-leads of the Indigenous Watersheds Initiative, Zita Botello and Bridget Taylor. Myself, Claire, Shannon and Julia are not able to be on the call today. Sorry, Shannon and Natalie are not able to be on the call today. And Julia Benson is assisting with communications behind the scenes today. So for those of you joining us for the first time, just providing a little bit of background about the Indigenous Watersheds Initiative. The initiative is a co-led program with Watersheds BC and Make Way Foundation, who are stewarding $15 million of provincial funding through the initiative. These funds are helping to support Indigenous-led or co-led projects that advance First Nations priorities for the health and security of their watersheds. The IWI is a 3-year initiative running until 2025, which builds on the success of the Healthy Watersheds initiative, which was co-led by Watersheds BC and the Real Estate Foundation of BC. And the IWI, our program, continues to receive guidance from members of the Indigenous Leaders Advisory Circle. A lot of this information you can find on the IWI website, www.indigenouswatersheds.ca. In 2022, the province of BC invested an additional $30 million into watershed security across the province. 15 million of that was provided to Make Way and Watersheds BC to establish the Indigenous Watersheds Initiative. Really early on in 2022, part of the funding, about $6 million of the funding, was awarded to Indigenous-led projects that were started under the previous program, the HWI. And then we had a public call for proposals in 2023 to Indigenous communities. That was launched in April 2023. We had a successful application and review process with the Indigenous Leaders Advisory Circle, and projects were awarded funding in the summer of 2023. So from some of the interim reports that we received, we just wanted to kind of provide a little bit of a support we received from communities or communications that we received from the communities. So one of the projects, the Annschild First Nation, had let us know that, this funding is really important to support the community's ability to build staff capacity in their lands department. And then knowing that it takes time to do so, this ongoing funding from IWI is important to allow the community to do their work and to build their team. So just wanted to recognize the important work that is being done on the ground. This map just provides a really quick overview of the 49 projects and their locations. So IWI supports projects across British Columbia with Indigenous-led projects that are dedicated to the stewardship and restoration of their local watersheds. The projects encompass a wide range of focus areas, including cultural stewardship, habitat restoration, monitoring, fisheries management, food security, and watershed and planning decision-making. So it's a really great range of projects and different types of projects at all scales across the province. Once we've had a look at, we're able to kind of assess all of the proposals and the projects. We were really doing a little bit of work just to try to understand better the types of projects that communities were doing and try to understand the priorities that communities have. So really all of the projects kind of across the board work to address for the nations the health of their lands and the health of their peoples, and dealing with climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. So the projects really do address the many priorities and objectives that nations have and highlight the inherent connectedness and the nature of their work. So in addition to addressing the community priorities relating to healthy watersheds and climate adaptations, a lot of the projects focus on one or more other areas, such as Indigenous knowledge and land-based learning, restoration and protection, fisheries and food sovereignty, planning and governance, and monitoring and assessment. So now that all the funding that the IWI had to provide to communities and put out to good work on the ground. We wanted to find ways in non-financial ways that we could work to support those projects in those communities. So one of the things that we're doing is this series of webinars. And really the webinars are intended to hold space for Indigenous leaders, communities, and organizations and their project teams to build connection, share knowledge and learnings, and to discuss challenges and solutions relating to First Nation watershed priorities. So with that background on the IWI, I would like to introduce Robin Annschild. So as I mentioned before, Robin is the founder of Rewilding Earth and Water. She's working not only with her own company, but with IWI, working to support a number of communities and Indigenous organizations on their projects. Robin specializes in wetland and stream restoration, including site assessment and restoration design, permitting, project management, and construction supervision. Robin works with governments, municipalities, NGOs, schools, and several IWI-led projects to provide habitat for wildlife and to support healthy watershed function. She has a breadth of experience working across the province on big and small projects, and we're really happy to have her join us on this webinar today. So with that, Robin, it's nice to see you, and we'll pass the Zoom over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, hang on, I'm just going to share my screen. Excuse me just a moment. There we go. I think that's good. Okay, does that look okay?
Perfect.
Yes? Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's really an honor to be here with you all. And thank you, Dina, for setting the stage around the IWI funding. It's amazing to have these resources available for Indigenous-led projects across the province. And I was asked to speak about my experience with project management for watershed restoration. And I was thinking about how I would, oh, wait a minute, my slides are not advancing. Hang on a second. Yeah, I was thinking about how I would express that. And I was thinking about how, you know, sometimes when we're sitting here having these conversations, we imagine that while we're inside doing this, that the watersheds are not moving. But of course, there's these dynamic processes going on in the watersheds all the time. And so when I think about managing watershed restoration projects, I picture it as navigating these 4 different streams that are flowing at different speeds, stopping and starting in this overall river of time. So let me show you what I mean by that. So I'm thinking about it as there's the hydrological, biological, or technical, or perhaps more poetically expressed, the relationship between water and the earth as it moves through the watershed. So how is water moving through the watershed? How is it interacting with the soil? And of course, with the plants and every other living being in the watershed. And then, so that's one piece, which to me oftentimes is one of the easier pieces, though it can be technically challenging. And then of course there's the financial piece. Where's the money coming from? Who's receiving the money? Who's managing it? How is it being dispersed to achieve the objectives? And then of course there's the regulatory piece, as well as the human social piece. And of course the regulatory piece is a human piece, but there's also the human piece around project partners, neighbors, neighbors that love your project and want to support it, neighbors that don't and want to make a lot of noise about being concerned that you're going to flood their property or something like that. So all of these processes are happening in project management as time is going by, and they all have different, hang on a second, my little advancer is put in here. Oh, that worked, okay. They all have different time frames. So before we jump into those 3 different streams, I first want to ask a question that I think is worth asking with every project is, are you managing the right project? So when you're thinking about project management and the watershed, I think it really helps to kind of think of it as you would think about a first aid situation or a first responder. You know, have you done that the ABCs, you know, check the airway, check the breathing, check the heart. And have you done a primary survey of the watershed to look at what's happening overall in the watershed? Because you may be directing your attention to one part of the watershed, and meanwhile there may be higher up in the watershed some severe erosion happening that, if you were to address that first, would help prevent some of the other issues that you're trying to address lower down in the watershed. And also, I think it's really important to ask yourself and to be able to clearly articulate for yourself and your project team, what are you trying to accomplish with this project? Are you trying to simply provide ecological lift? Do you want to improve restore habitat for fish? Do you want to provide more resilience to climate change? And in some ways, you know, maybe those questions are meaningless, because when you do watershed restoration, you're often accomplishing all of those things. And it's helpful to be clear about what your specific objectives for that project. And another way of looking at that would be to say, what problems are you trying to solve? So for instance, in this sad remains of a creek here, which is Somenos Creek, you know, the water temperature is really too high for fish. It's being taken over by non-native weedy species. And so you could think of it as, given that things are always changing in our watersheds, what trajectory of change do you want to intervene in with this project, and for what purpose? And then it's also really helpful to think about the scale at which you want to work. Is this a first project for your community or nation or organization, and are you starting really small, or are you wanting to work at the watershed scale? And really, we all need to be going in that direction of working at the watershed scale. So I really encourage you to be learning and developing, you know, that confidence to do that. And if, as in the case of this project here, so this is just a conceptual sketch for a very small wetland restoration in a much larger watershed. If you are working at a small scale, I think it's really helpful to also, at least in your mind and in your awareness of what's going on in the watershed, zoom out to a larger scale so that you can think about how that small piece that you're doing would fit into that larger area if additional work is ever done. So that little area that I just showed you is right here. And if you zoom out to a larger scale, this is a tributary of the west arm of Kootenay Lake. And this stream here was diverted 1, 2, 3 times. So the yellow line is showing you the path of the creek. And originally it used to flow down here, and probably some of the flow through the project area. So as you're designing and planning a small area, think about how that's going to fit in with the wider picture, and making sure that you're not cutting off opportunities for yourself down the road. And I think being able to clearly to clarify your objectives and keep them really simple. So here's an example of a project where this is a dam removal project, and we had other objectives too, but 2 really simple, clear objectives we had was, we wanted to resaturate all these organic soils so that the carbon would be stored and it wouldn't be lost, you know, through decomposition in the presence of oxygen. And we also wanted to provide breeding habitat for western toad. And here's the same site in 2023. You can see there's wetlands all the way across the entire floodplain. So we've achieved that objective. We've resaturated the floodplain, and also we were able to document western toad breeding in the basin. And, you know, going on with thinking ahead towards your project, it's really important to be flexible with your plans. I think making a project plan is a good idea. In some cases, I might have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 kind of parallel plans. So if this happens, we're going to do this. If that happens, we're going to do that, as a way to manage risk. And here's an example this is not 2023, when there was another fire at Akam, and that, you know, tragically destroyed a number of homes. But this was from 2017. So we were building a wetland project very close to the Akam community, and this wildfire started, and it was threatening to cut off our only access road. So we literally had to park all the heavy equipment in the middle of the area we've excavated and evacuate the site, which is not something you generally are thinking is likely to happen on your wetland restoration project. So you know that you're going to have obstacles with this work, and that you will be resourceful enough to work around them or get through them. And sometimes they're things that you really should have thought of ahead of time, like really how wide is that gate and how wide is the excavator? But in this case, you'll be glad to know we were able to get it through, though there was only a couple of inches or less on each side. Oops. And one of the reasons why this is so important is I really think we need to be bold and courageous in this work of watershed restoration, because we are not just doing it for human communities. We're doing it for all those that live in these watersheds who cannot speak for themselves. And there will be many, there will be hydrological obstacles and along the way, but a lot of the obstacles really are human-made obstacles to navigate. And as you're navigating those obstacles, it's really important to keep a sense of humor when things go wrong, because it is assured and guaranteed that unexpected things are going to happen. Things are going to go wrong. I think that's just part of every project. It's not so much thinking, how do we avoid these things, as how do we respond to them as best we can when they happen. And one of the ways of doing that is identifying your own, as a person, your own individual resources and strengths and within your team, and then recruiting the help that you need to provide, both the on the ground knowledge as well as the technical knowledge to support the project planning and delivery. And, the team that's going to assist you and partner with you is not just a human team, it's also the non-human team. So Raripa palustris marsh yellowcress is one of my superstar plants that is really incredible native plant that is incredible at propagating itself in wetland areas. Of course, there's also the beaver and cottonwood. Here's a cottonwood 2 years old and over 2 meters tall. And an important consideration too with these projects, especially larger ones, is, are you going to build in phases? Are you going to build it all out at once? And there's not a better way. It really depends on the site and your own, your capacity, your funding, and many considerations about the site itself. So once you've done sort of that work around the edges, then you can go ahead and start, determining what techniques you want to implement on your project in terms of that technical or hydrological restoration piece. And here's an example of building vertical grade control to restore floodplain saturation in a stream that's been incised. And here we're also building another type of vertical grade control across the floodplain and being sure to map it, because that is covered up afterwards. You wouldn't know that was there if we hadn't mapped it. These very large boulders that are anchoring a reconnected stream that was disturbed for over 100 years by a dam. So going back to this notion of these 4 streams, going through the river of time, we've got all these hydrological, biological pieces. And then of course we've got the financial piece. Now I know Dina's going to speak about this a little bit, so I'm going to be pretty quick on it. But something that I've noticed, in working with various organizations is, if you find funders that really support your own objectives, that's going to help you a lot more than kind of chasing the funds because of what the funders want to fund. If you can find that really strong overlap between what the funders' priorities are and what yours are, it's going to make your work easier and more productive. And just a quick tip around managing multiple funders, what I found helps for me is, when I create my budget for a project and I've got all my different line items and what's the total cost, then I just simply create a column for each funder and allocate whatever fund has been, whatever amount has been applied to that funder for, or that we expect to get from that funder, excuse me, that we're projecting into that column. And that makes it, relatively, it's still a bit of a puzzle, but it makes it easier to keep track of each funder, what they've committed, what activities they've committed that match their priorities. And then by doing that, you can also create additional columns to track your in-kind, which depending on the funder, you may need to track that in multiple different ways for multiple different funders. And then once you have all those pieces in place, then of course you get into the actual implementation of the project, managing the budget, modifying the budget. And what I'm finding with this work is that there are a lot of things that are so unpredictable that it's very rare that we create a project budget that stays as is throughout the life of the project. So what I found is that project funders are typically, if they like your project and they've committed to it, they want to see you succeed. And as long as what your, any changes you want to make to the budget fall within the items that are eligible for their funding, typically funders are very willing to adjust the budget categories to help your project adapt to this new information that's coming in as you're implementing it. And then, of course, you have to report out on that. And I know Dina's going to speak to that a little bit, but I find, when, and I don't, in my current role, don't do this so much right now, but I used to do this a lot in my previous role. And as soon as I would get a funder telling me you've got the funding, pretty much my first question after thank you so much for funding us is, tell me about your reporting schedule. What are your reporting needs? And then schedule those out. And then once you have that for all of your funders, see if you can create a single report or set of reports that will really meet all of their needs. Now, you may also have to fill in online forms or that kind of thing, but if you can have one report, then you can cut and paste to those different ones. Or apparently nowadays you can use ChatGPT, but I'm old-fashioned, so I haven't tried that yet. So carrying on with this notion of these different strands of project management or streams, the next one, which is in some ways perhaps the most challenging, I think right now, is the regulatory one. And it's now December, and it's been a long full year. And really one of the ways that I cope with the regulatory framework is with humor. If I didn't laugh about it and joke about it, I probably would have torn all my hair out by now over permitting. The one project that I was showing you photos of, we had 11 different permit applications for that project, 3 of which in the end they decided, oh no, we don't need those anymore, but they first asked us to fill them all in before they decided we didn't need them. So permitting can be really time consuming, really complex, and one of the challenges around it in BC right now is that the timing is very unpredictable. So that makes it very difficult for you to manage your entire project if you're waiting. I think maybe things have improved a little bit with the ARC branch, but if you're waiting for the ARC branch to come through with a permit, that's where you really need, plan A. If ARC branch comes through, we're going to do this. If they don't, we're going to do that. If they do come through and we do an archaeological impact assessment and we find something, then we're going to do this. So that's where those multiple plans really come in handy. And the other thing is, really to get these permits, you need to be like a salmon. You need to be ready to swim upstream. You need to be ready to leap over waterfalls. And essentially, in my experience, these large, more complex projects that I've worked on, every one of them has required really staying in touch with the permitting officers and asking them, what, if any, obstacles are in your way to approving this? Is there more information I can provide? Can I organize a conference call with the other authorities that are reviewing this project? How can I facilitate this moving forward? And our start date is, because otherwise I think we would still be waiting on some of these permits for projects that we've completed, several years ago. And another thing about this, do not be afraid to read the Act. Now, if your project, if you're working on Water Sustainability Act applications, if you are getting told something that doesn't seem to make sense to you, I encourage you to read the Act, and the Act will prevail. Because what I've experienced in applying for these permits in different regions of BC is that I'm getting different answers or different interpretations or different understandings from different staff. And so, yeah, don't be afraid to jump in and read the Act. And if you can bring to them like, hey, this is what it says in the Act, then that will prevail. And just on the topic of the regulatory framework, that sort of segues nicely into multi-agency projects. If you are doing water shed scale restoration, you will inevitably get into multi-agency, complicated, multi-stakeholder projects, and that might be a little daunting. And I really encourage you to do it. We need to do it. Our watersheds need it, and I think you'll find it, though it does take quite a bit of patience. you can achieve these incredible results when we work together. And one of the ways that I found works really well is if you can bring all these parties together with a focus on what are our areas of shared values and shared objectives, and really keep that in the center of your working relationship. And then there'll be things outside that that are things that are not of value to you or not of value to someone else, but don't necessarily conflict. And then in the outer ring, there might be things where you actually really kind of are at odds with each other. But if you can stay focused on that inner ring of the areas where there's mutual understanding, shared interest in accomplishing something, that's where the magic can really happen in terms of doing this landscape level restoration that really benefits our watersheds. So I'm going to go through quickly a few things on the site that you might not always consider. I sure didn't consider it when I first started doing these larger projects. Is are you going to need to spend money improving the access, adding gravel, grading the access road? Archaeological concerns, as I said earlier, they can be really unpredictable. If there's areas of potential, it's hard to know how much what the budget's going to be to address them. Are you going to avoid them? And so that's something to look at really early if you can. And of course, cultural monitoring during construction. Are you going to be salvaging amphibians? Depends on the time of year and the site and what personnel is going to do that. And how's that going to be managed in terms of managing construction? If you're in urban sites, you have to maintain the safety of the site. There may be people living in the construction zone, and how are you going to make sure that people are not at risk, from the heavy equipment, and that the area of construction is clear. If you're removing infrastructure, you need to consider, where is that material going to go? Is it going to be removed from the site? Is it going to be buried? Is some of it going to be removed? And how will it be transported off site? Managing fire risk is one that I think we're all getting pretty used to by now, but it's still a consideration. Are you going to avoid that season if you can? Are you going to make sure that you have, firefighting equipment on the site? And a really big one too is choosing the best heavy equipment for the job. I mean, that that's something that I've been learning about over the years. Excuse me, I also have a tickle in my throat today. Apologies. And there's quite a learning curve on this. So generally speaking, as a general principle, the largest machine that you can get into the site is going to be the most economical one, because the cost per unit or volume moved is going to be lower. And you're not going to be an expert unless you're an operator. So collaborating with those expert excavator operators to solve problems on the site is really going to help you manage the budget in an efficient way. If there's something that needs to be done, but you don't know the exact steps of how to do it, typically your operators will either have done this before, hopefully, or they'll be able to figure out with their skill and knowledge how to go about doing it in an efficient way. And one thing I think that's really important to consider is, typically, if you're working with skilled and experienced contractors and operators, they're very busy. They don't have to work with you. They're doing it because they want to. And that there's a huge value to the contractor's goodwill towards you and towards the project. Here's an example. I asked the contractor if he'd be willing to work on a Sunday. He said, well, I don't know if I can get the trucks to do this work on the Sunday. In the end, he was able to round up 5 trucks. So that's not just his goodwill towards the project, it's also the goodwill of all those other contractors willing to work on a Sunday because they know him and respect him. So I think that's really important to think about, those things in the background that are helping your project to be successful. And just in case you get the wrong idea, I highly recommend never loading stuff into trucks. That was the only project where I ever did it. I just wanted to give the example of the goodwill, but do not plan to put things in trucks unless that is your last resort. It's really, really expensive. So of course you need to manage equipment on the site. Where is all the equipment going to be? Here's a large site. Some of the equipment is not working on this day. And, when you get into larger projects with more equipment, personnel, time off, you will have machines that aren't working sometimes. Typically, you're not paying for those machines while they're sitting there idle. You also have to think about, how are you managing materials on the site? How are you going to move it around? Here we're using a loader. We've also used rock trucks. We use normal tandem trucks. Here we have a logging truck unloading a load of logs. So you need to think about staging areas, access, and then how you're going to restore those areas at the end. And in some cases, we have revegetation crews following immediately after the heavy equipment. Depends on the ecosystem, you know, what the moisture conditions are like. Sometimes that work is done later. And it really varies whether we're providing that or whether, you know, which of the project partners is providing that. Sometimes there can be some good partnerships where partners may have access to volunteers or access to funds for that. So that was a super quick zoom through a lot of things around project management. I hope it's been a little bit helpful to look at, you know, these different aspects of it. And one of the challenging pieces is that, you know, the hydrological pieces have their season. You know, we've got freshet, we've got the fish window, we've got the bird window. Then the financial pieces have their own constraints, which are different. The regulatory pieces, they have their own timelines, which are mysterious and unpredictable. And then, of course, there's the human social piece. So it can be really challenging to get all of those things to line up. And in some ways, it's almost surprising we ever get any of these projects done, especially because the regulatory piece in BC is such an impediment when you're applying for Water Sustainability Act approval authorizations, because it can take, you know, it can take over a year. And archaeology, we've also had some big delays with that. So hopefully that's changing and improving. And I'm just going to leave you with a couple of before and afters. This is a former drinking water reservoir that we added some wetland features to for the city of Creston. And then this is a wetland restored using the compacted clay liner technique in the floodplain of the Kootenay River. So thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing to restore watersheds. I think it's the good work of our time. You know, it's so satisfying and it's so inspiring to see how the streams and the wildlife respond when we initiate these projects and give them a chance. And I kind of joke that I'm learning to speak Creek, and I really see that it's a conversation between us and the stream and the watershed. You know, we come in and we observe, we see how it's functioning, and we take certain actions, and then we go, okay, now how is the stream and the watershed going to respond? And so over time, because these are not short-term projects, these are 1,000-year or more projects to recover, you know, from some of the damage that's been done to our watersheds. So over time, I hope that in this conversation, we're going to become more fluent in speaking Creek and more able to take the actions that are going to repair our watersheds. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you, Robin. That was a great presentation. Thanks for all the visuals and really kind of bringing life to what I'm going to talk about now a little bit, which is a little bit more boring, but for really bringing life into sharing your experiences for what it's like kind of in the real world when you're out in the field running these projects, and the reminder that, you know, you can have kind of like all the plans in the world, but really what a project manager's job is, half of their job is really dealing with these challenges and trying to find solutions kind of on a daily basis to all the various types of challenges that you can run into on a project. So I know that Robin spoke a lot about kind of like planning and scoping the project. We want to share with you, you don't have to take notes here. We're going to be sending these documents out to you after the call, along with a list of resources that we're going to be talking about on the call today. But some of you might know me from my previous work with the First Nations Fisheries Council of BC. About 6 or 7 years ago, I worked on a project with the Okanagan Nation Alliance Fisheries Department to prepare a written guidebook, so a First Nations planning guidebook for freshwater fisheries habitat restoration projects, and along with a companion book or workbook that has a lot of the templates that you might need for planning and scoping your projects. So the guidebook is really great because it kind of gives you sort of like a step-by-step overview, like the thinking that you might need to go into your projects. And really knowing that what's presented in the guidebook is kind of like the Cadillac luxury version, but it's entirely scalable to your project. So, you know, you take the things that that work for your project, the time you have for your projects, the budgets, and the teams that you have, and it will kind of help you to plan and scope your project appropriately, and kind of give you some of those things that that you might need to think about, or plans that the plan A and the plan B and the plan C that Robin talked about, that you might need to have in place to help you mitigate any challenges that come up throughout the project. So the guidebook really goes through kind of in a step-by-step way, scoping the project, considerations for building your project team. So that's not only the staff, but all the different experts and contractors and subcontractors that you might need to help you make your project successful. Thinking about any pre and post cultural and ceremonial protocols that you might need to engage with your project. So engaging knowledge keepers in your community, elders in your community, doing any pre or post celebratory or ceremonial projects. It's kind of key to think about how you're scheduling those into the projects as well. The actually planning and designing the restoration works, the physical work. So like, as we talked about, the permitting and engineering designs, and kind of getting the list of all the materials and aggregates and plants and things like that you might need for your project. Developing an outreach plan, because a lot of the projects, particularly like that the Okanagan Nation Alliance Fisheries Department does, are really in an urban setting. So like, there's a lot of people that are constantly walking by your project site. You might need to deal with landowners, property owners, both upstream and downstream of your project sites. Thinking through what you might need to do in terms of pre-project monitoring and assessment. So what does your site look like before you go in and do any work? It's really important to document that as well, so you can then do the post-project monitoring assessment to see how well your physical works went, your restoration project went, and how things might need to be kind of tweaked in the future. You know, Robin had made a really good point about the thinking like a creek and thinking like the water. Like, water has, one of the elders in my community talks about like water being very humble, but also being very powerful as well. So water is going to do what water is going to do, and it's going to move where it needs to move. And part of the project, or part of the learning, I think, around doing a lot of this work is learning to respect the water and help the water do the work that it needs to do as well. So a lot of that is contained within the project planning guide. And then the workbook is, like I said, just a list of different templates and checklists that you might need to do, like in terms of like your safety protocols, designing your project design plans, contractor checklists, community outreach checklists. So there's kind of like a wealth of knowledge contained in both the guidebook and the workbook that may help provide some assistance to you in kind of thinking through and planning through your projects. Next slide, Julia. So now I'm going to get into talking a little bit about the project budget and managing projects and contracts. So I'm going to just share my screen with you because I have an Excel spreadsheet that I want to show you. So I really encourage people as well that, you know, like Excel, I know a lot of people are afraid of it. I used to be one of the few people in our office that, you know, really liked using Excel, and we kind of always encourage everybody to use it. It can be a really great tool and a really simple tool to help you do a lot of tracking of your projects and activities. So what I've done is I've created kind of like a mock budget tracking sheet. So this is something that I learned to do 20 years ago when I was first starting out. And, you know, in any given year, I might have somewhere between 10 or 15 different projects on the go, lots of times all with different funders, really distinct projects. Some of them are really small, like in the $20,000 range, and some of them were really big, up to like $1 million. So learning how to like budget and track those projects when, you know, as a project manager, you're often wearing multiple hats as well. So just really learning how to manage your time and develop processes and systems that will help you kind of track things appropriately, will sort of save you at the end of the year when you have to do your interim reports and your final reports. So what I used to do when I'd get a new contract in place is set up a simple contract and budget tracking sheet. I would put in our project number that would be assigned by our accounting system. So every new project, every contract gets its own project number in the accounting system. A description of what the project title is, what the project name is, the funding agreement, who the funding agreement is with, because like I said, you may have multiple contracts from the same funder. And their contract number. So this is really important to keep track of as well, because when you're doing reporting back to the funder, you know, they might be managing themselves 100 different projects. So it really helps them kind of track down things on their end as well, if you ever need to contact the funder. The funder contact, the contract start date and the end date, the total project amount, and then noting any kind of reporting or invoicing scheduling items, like when the reporting is due, the interim reports, the final reports. Also noting any specific contract terms and conditions. So this would be things like, you know, I know DFO and DFO projects, their contracts say that if you have a budget variance of more than 10% of the project, you have to get an approval from back from DFO. So it's always good to know, just kind of make a quick note on the sheet, what some of those terms and conditions might be. So I know that a lot of the stuff is tracked by either your bookkeeper or your accountant in the organization's accounting system, but the project manager, you might not have access to that system. So this was like a quick way for me. I would have this as in a binder on my desk with all my projects in it for the year. And it's just like a one-page cover sheet that I can always kind of like quickly access and refer to if I have some questions. In addition to this overall contract and budget tracking sheet, I would put in the project budget. So a note that this is really the budget that went into the proposal or the agreement that you have signed, because that's how the funder is going to be reviewing and assessing your projects as well when you turn in your interim financial reports and the final financial reports. So what you want to do is just make note of the expense categories that were in the contract and the different amounts and how that's broken down. And then as you're getting your accounting reports and statements from your bookkeeper or your financial manager, what I would do is I would have another column which would list my year to date expenses. So the project budget is kind of like the project budget overall, but at different times in the year, I'd want to know if I'm on track with my project. And I would just update the sheet. So, you know, the project started in July. I'm looking in November, kind of want to know kind of like where I'm at in terms of the finances. I might have received $100,000 of that $150,000 project budget. So that's really quick for your own kind of cash management for the project. And I'd list all of the subtotals of all the salaries, any invoices to contractors and consultants, what I spent on equipment rental, project supplies and materials, operational costs, meeting events, travel, training, communications, capital expenses, IT, software, and then what goes back to the organization for administration. So, you know, if I quick glance, I can kind of pull open this binder to have a look to see where I'm at, noticing that, you know, like I've got another few months for the project, couple months for the project. I've got $50,000 left on the project. I've spent $100,000. So this helps me know if I need to go back to the funder to say, to say, hey, we're going to be doing, or we'd like to do this extra work. We have a little bit of funding, or this is where we have like a budget shortfall. This is where we've had to move money around between the projects, just so you're doing kind of like that appropriate level check-in with some of your funders. So then how this works and how this kind of like speaks to the accounting system that you might have with your organization, and knowing that, you know, some organizations are really small. You might have, you know, 10 or 20 employees. Other communities and organizations are really big, and you might have like over 100 employees in the organization. So getting access and having time and working with your financial manager and your accounts payable folks is going to be really important to make sure that you're getting the information as you need as well. And one of the other things that I would do, like knowing that an organization, like the chart of accounts across an organization, could be very big. So this is just how like the organization tracks different expenses kind of like by their projects. By their categories. So you could probably get the chart of accounts from your accountant or bookkeeper, and it might list, you know, 50 or 60 or, you know, up to 100 different categories, breaking them down in different ways, like administration, wages, benefits, salary, CPP, employment insurance, what you spend on honorary or stipends, consulting fees, contractor fees, legal fees, different professional services, accounting services, training. It's kind of the list goes on. So why this is important and why I'm showing you this is because you might have a chart of accounts that has 50 or 60 different things, whereas your contract budget has 10 categories. So it's important to know when you're reviewing your invoices and things like that, how you're coding things properly to see what gets rolled up into each of those categories. So, you know, this like travel is a good one to show. So you might have an overall travel budget of $10,000, but when you're getting invoices coming in and you're coding these things, you might have, your organization might ask you to track travel in different ways. They want to know how much specifically you're spending on airfare or mileage or different travel miscellaneous expenses like ferries and taxis and parking, accommodations and meals and per diems. Well, your funder doesn't care about that necessarily. They don't care about that level of detail. So what you're going to do is you're going to subtotal all of these travel categories, and that's what goes into your tracking the expenses. It's a subtotal of all those different things. So what I would do as well, kind of like on a month-to-month basis, is just kind of like maintaining, you know, like who's got control over the budget, who gets budget approvals. And when invoices would come in, I would spend like, you know, one day a week or like a morning a week or every couple of weeks, just going through all of the invoices and coding them specifically. So like your project teams might be handing you like a folder with their travel claims, and they paid for different equipment or supplies out in the field. You've received your invoices from, you know, 10 different contractors on 20 different projects. So you kind of have to go through and have a system where you're on each of the invoices, I would say, okay, please pay this from project 159, and it's a travel expense. And so I would put the appropriate travel expense that I wanted it coded to. So once you're getting your statements every year or periodically from your finance manager, you know, mistakes happen, human error happens. So as they're entering things into the accounting system, you might note some discrepancies like, oh, well, that should have actually been an expense posted to this other project 140, not 159. So you're able to kind of quickly go through and identify for your finance department where things need to be adjusted or where there's some discrepancies. I know this is it's really detailed and I'm going over it very quickly. I would just really encourage anybody, if you're struggling with your budgeting and contract management, and if this is useful for you, like I'm happy to spend some time kind of like working with anybody one-on-one if you need a little bit of help doing that, because it like I said, it's a little bit kind of confusing until you get into it, until you've built a system, until you've worked with it a little bit to figure out what kind of works for you. So Julia, if I could have the PowerPoint back up, please. Thank you. And the next slide. So thinking about contract management and budgeting, like some of the advice that I would give would be to work really closely with your finance manager and bookkeeper to developing a tracking system that works for you and your projects, and be really clear on the roles and responsibilities. So know what their role is and what you're doing. So if you've got budget approval and signing authority, like all the invoices and things can come to you. Maybe they're required to provide you a statement of your accounts on a monthly basis. So just be really clear on what the roles and responsibilities are going to be between you and your finance department. Understand the terms and conditions of your funding agreements, assign your project expense codes to things like timesheets, travel claims, and invoices before they're submitted to finance for payment. So this will really help you track later on, because believe me, I've spent the first couple of years that I was learning to do this, I would be almost in tears at the end of the fiscal year trying to sort through like tiny little lines on Excel spreadsheets, wondering where like a payment went missing or things like that. So as you kind of get into the system, it will really help you in the long run. When you're working with consultants, contractors, and doing any kind of like large scale purchasing, make sure you get quotes and service agreements and sales contracts in place before the work begins. You only have to be burned on this 1 or 2 times before, like that's something that you put into practice kind of on every project that you work on. And then remember to review your project account statements on a regular basis to track and monitor your expenditures and to detect any discrepancies with your funding. And just as my voice is going to give out, I'm going to pass it over to Claire to talk about some of the tips and tricks and tools that we use at our IWI team to kind of keep us on track.
Thanks, Dina. Good morning, everyone. My name's Claire, and I'm Program Associate with IWI, and I'm the team's resident project management tool and app enthusiast. So I'm here to talk about some tips and tools that are mostly digital for project management. And my main message today is to pick a system that works for your team and for you to feel organized about your project, and that the system might include a couple of different tools. So what I'm sharing today is really going to be, again, a lightning speed overview of some of the tools that our team uses, some of the tools that we know exist out there. I'm still very much on the learning curve for this, but I do listen to a lot of podcasts about project management, and a really easy acronym that I'll be talking about today came from a podcaster named Mark Devine, and it's CPR. So the first letter, C, is for communication. The next is P for productivity, and R for resources or records. And I'll go through each of these briefly. So in the following slides, you're going to see a lot of app names, but don't worry about taking notes. We're going to send out a resource list so that you can go through these at your own pace. So for the first C, communication, it's really key in all levels of project management of work. It's a chance to clarify objectives like Robin was talking about. It aligns your teams and partners roles and responsibilities like Dina mentioned. Good communication manages risk. It also manages when staff turnover happens and there might be a handover. So we need to have some good systems in place to share. In terms of the tools that are out there for communication, the first one is email. Our team sends many emails. I get dozens a day. I think probably Robin and Dina might get in the hundreds a day. So really it's our main communication tool, both internally and externally. An internal tool, we use Teams for IWI. There's also Slack. Folks use online chatting tools such as Google Hangouts. Lots of different ways to keep in touch instantaneously. So we use Teams and Slack for sending news articles or websites or links. So these can also become repositories or libraries for resources. So that's something to keep track of because you don't want it to become the only place where knowledge is stored, but I'll get into that later. Another important piece of communication is knowing the regularity of meetings. We have regular meetings every Monday afternoon. As a remote team, we gather in person every month or two. So a regular schedule of meetings is very helpful at the outset of a project. And I will mention the #1 rule of meetings: if you don't need a meeting, don't have a meeting. So just keeping that in mind, that time is precious and we're in a lot of meetings. And as a team, we have discussed our comfort level with calls and texts. So the next letter of CPR is productivity. So these are the big task management tools that act as buckets or containers for your project. What we've got here is a sample of softwares that are designed to help individuals and teams to plan, organize, and track progress on tasks in any given project. It's very easy to get caught up in the bells and whistles of marketing, but these are tools for you and your teams to use to understand where you are at in the project. And it's important to not let the task manager drive the project. It should be the other way around. When you choose a tool, it needs to align with your objectives. So there are lots of options. I'm going to go through these very quickly. The environment that we're in right now, they're proliferating. There's a lot of different choices, but these are some of the big ones that folks use. So Asana, it's a task management tool that's quite user-friendly. It has tasks on a list. It's quite good for timelines. Everything gets noted with a date. Monday.com is very similar. Its big feature is dependencies. So if you are interested in making a project plan in which activity A triggers activity B, Monday might be an interesting one to explore for you all. Basecamp is another tool that I think some of the folks on this call use, that we heard in the survey at the beginning when you registered. This Basecamp has projects on different pages. So this might be an interesting one for folks who have several projects on the go and want to do have a framework, kind of like what Dina was showing, where everything has its own page. Trello in the bottom left pioneered what's called a Kanban style view, in which you scroll through the app horizontally and everything is in columns with different cards for each task. I'll show a little demo of this kind of thing because it's the same interface that Planner has, more or less, and I'll do a demo of that. And then one that James Casey, I think he just hopped off the call, but that he shared with us that I had not heard of before is Mirati, which is a conservation-focused project management tool. I'm not sure who's developed it. I just had a quick look of their website, and again, we'll share all these out. But it seems to be under development. It's got some interesting potential for folks who are working in restoration, and there's a chance to make your project public. So if transparency is something that you'd like to work into your project plan, Mirati might be something to look into. So if there are any more that folks use, feel free to put them in the chat. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was resources and records. So in terms of the information that you have as a project manager, it's really crucial to think about how you manage your resources and records, as Dina was saying, not only for yourself and for your organization so that you don't feel confused about the kind of work that's happening, but also for others that might come onto the project after you. It's a reality of the work that we have a lot of turnover. People go on leave, people take different jobs, but projects continue. So it's really important to have a good tracking system that is somehow documented so that the next person might take it on from you, or when you have a new person coming on, it makes it easy for them to jump right in. On the left, in terms of tracking records, Excel is a great example, and I think Dina went through kind kind of the functionality of it. Excel can be collaborative. There are ways to use it online. And now there are several other products that are spreadsheets that you access via the internet. So one that we like to use at IWI is Airtable. It's a spreadsheet that's built to encourage collaboration so that you don't feel like you're drowning in records. It doesn't have the same functionality as Excel for doing bookkeeping, financial records. That's still very much an Excel specialty. However, Smartsheet, which I think also some folks on the call use, is very similar to Excel, but just online. And then a quick note on different ways to save and share files. Microsoft has SharePoint and Box, which are basically big containers to hold all of your documents. Google Drive is another similar one that's on the G Suite side of things. And in terms of file structure, I'll be the first to admit that our team isn't as disciplined as I think we all want to be in terms of filing stuff. It's easy to get it's easy to lose track of things, of course, because we're constantly working with files and creating new files. But for file naming, I do think that this starting a file name with the year at the front is helpful. Just one little tip. I know it seems weird, but if you think about it, already next month, we are going to be in 2024. And so we're all still going to be working on a lot of the same projects. And this allows you to kind of just skim things chronologically. So trying to have a file naming system that includes the date at the front could save you a lot of time when you're looking through for a specific document. And so you don't feel like you're drowning in your paperwork. But like I said, we're still learning how to do this as well. Other tools that we like to use, there are a lot of different online whiteboards that since moving online, we're able to use. So our team uses Miro. Mural and Jamboard are two other examples of online whiteboards. This little animation is an example of Mural where different folks can come on and move, make notes, move sticky notes, add images. It's great for strategic planning or a larger team meeting if you want to get folks to participate. There's another one called Obsidian that will include some information on afterwards. And the last app I wanted to share about is Canva, which is not a whiteboard, but it is an indispensable communications tool. For IWI, a lot of our documents that will be going out or our website posts get finished in Canva. So if you don't have a Canva account, I would definitely encourage you to play around with it. There's a good free version, especially if your team does social media. Julia, who's on the call, is our expert on Canva, and I know she'd be happy to talk to you if you have any questions about how to use it and how great it is. So very briefly, I just wanted to do a quick note on Google Workspaces versus Microsoft. They're two ecosystems. They have different apps underneath them which do the same function. So for example, Google has Gmail, Microsoft has Outlook, Google has Google Docs, Microsoft has Word. They're very comparable, but the reason I'm sharing the difference is because as project managers, you'll need at minimum email, word processing, spreadsheets, ways to connect with your team. Most organizations have Microsoft because that's the company that owns Word and Excel. Our team is fully on Microsoft, but I'm bringing this up because it's just good to think about your collaborators and partners and what they might use. I'm not saying that you need to have the same system as your consultant or as a contractor, but just at minimum be aware that There are two different ecosystems that might make for some tech hiccups along the way, and it's worth asking people on the team what they use, just so you know who's running the system and how people are accessing shared documents. So very briefly, just sharing some tools that IWI uses. We use a combination of Microsoft Planner, which this animation is kind of a similar way of showing. This isn't our project, but it's just an animation. So you make a card that has a task on it, and you can have subtasks. The columns are set up for different buckets of work, and it's very easy to move a card around. You're able to assign them to folks and then track progress over time. It's very user-friendly. One of the reasons that we're using it is because it came with our Microsoft license. So we knew that everybody had access to it. Nobody had to go make another account on yet another web platform. So we went with this. There are some limitations. The good thing about Microsoft is it's constantly updating and adding new features. It's kind of the same for everything, but it's working for our team. I'm currently the administrator of it. So when you do have a project management tool, it's always good to have a point person and have them kind of be the keeper of the tool. I'll just briefly talk about calendars. Calendaring is very tough. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because it's just so idiosyncratic and so personal. I've got my personal calendar, I've got my family calendar, I've got my work calendar. I'm just one person, I'm just one body, and yet I have all of these different ways of organizing my time. I've just read also that a lot of people who work at offices all day spend an average of 4 hours a week scheduling themselves and that much time on calendars. So it seems kind of high, but I can understand it. So I'll just leave you with one personal practice that I like to do, which is if I can spend 15 minutes at the end of the week just looking forward and taking a look at my calendar for the following week. I do like to peek into my colleagues' calendars, see what they're working on, make sure that I've got their time booked if I need it. Similar to what Dina was saying, a little bit of preparation early on will really save some headaches later. We haven't even talked about Gantt charts today, but I just wanted to mention that in terms of Gantt charts, not so much of a daily tool, but calendars you use every single day. So really spending some time on building a calendar system that works for you is helpful. I've been hearing feedback from folks that Gantt charts are helpful for the beginning of a project, but sometimes they don't get updated so well. So it's worth looking at different tools like the ones that I've gone through. And if that's really important to you, find one of the tools that has a good Gantt chart feature to it. So very briefly, that was our team's use of tools. And I just wanted to say that if anybody wants to talk about their project management troubles, or if you want to just bounce ideas off of someone for different tools, I'm happy to chat anytime.
Great. Thanks, Claire. We just have a couple more slides left, and I'd like to make sure that we've got at least 10 minutes for Q&A. So I will go through these last couple slides very quickly. Just want to talk about some tools that might be helpful for your teams thinking about communications and reporting. A lot of folks are familiar with Otter AI and Firefly's AI, which are two programs that you can use that record and transcribe meetings. So you can integrate it right into Zoom. But also for doing interviews. So if you're doing interviews with community members and things like that, it's a way to record and transcribe those to save you a little bit of like typing time. Some of the new features provide summaries of your meetings. You can integrate them with different applications, and now they include whiteboards, so you can do some of that that planning right in your those programs. ChatGPT is a big one that people are using. A lot of stuff on the news, a little bit controversial. I'll provide you a couple of examples in a moment, but ChatGPT is an AI generated program where you can enter easy prompts, and you can include some info to generate simple communication. So you can ask it things like, write me a briefing note, write me a 2-page summary of this meeting, take this information and put it into a table, etc. Like there's a range of things that you can ask these AI programs to do. It's like fascinating, but also kind of like scary at the same time, how technology has really evolved quickly over the last few years. And the last one I do want to mention here is Zotero. So for anybody that has to write a lot of technical reports or doing a lot of research papers, Zotero is a great tool that you can use to build a library of all your different references and citations, different papers that you read. So you kind of contain these in Zotero with all the appropriate citation information that you would need. And then you add what's called a plugin to your Microsoft Word program. That allows you, with the click of a button when you're writing a report, you want to add a reference from a specific paper written by a specific person and cited in a specific style. With one click, you can do that. So that really saves you a lot of time managing your citations and resources if you're writing technical reports. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that if that's something that you need to do on a regular basis. So now I'm just going to show you really quickly. I went into ChatGPT yesterday to develop just a couple examples to show you. So you could write a really simple prompt, but it gives you a very generic output. So I went into ChatGPT and I just said, write me a memo about project management. And it kind of, within 30 seconds to 45 seconds, it typed this out. It allows you to click with one push of a button to copy it and to put it into like your Word document. So you can add and modify and change things as you need. But like I said, simple prompts give you a very generic output. It's a good way to kind of like quickly check information on a topic that you're interested, just to get some general knowledge or something around a topic. Next slide, I put in I put in a simple prompt, but I provided it with some specific details. So I just took some of the content that we had in this slide today, and I said, write a project management plan with strategies to address project timelines and budgets. And then I copied out the words that we had on our PowerPoint presentation deck, put those in as input into the program. And then it provides a more specific text for your topic. Next one. And then you can ask it for lots of different types of output. So another one I put in was, help me write a letter to landowners to advise them of our river restoration project and how they can contact us if they have any questions or concerns. I put in a couple details about the project, like the project will occur over the summer 2024, where it's located, who the project is being led by, and what the project is intended to do. So in a really quick kind of like top of the head, 4 simple sentences, and it writes a letter for you. So the great thing about this is that you know, as project, like I had said earlier, project managers, especially in small teams, have a lot of hats. So you might be out in the field, you're doing budget management. You also are kind of like the face of the project and have to contact people, write memos and briefings to your chief and council, to local communities, to your project partners. So things like ChatGPT can really save you a little bit of time, but I just really do caution that, you know, like it is generic, but what it does is gives you a starting point. So when I have a letter like this, I can say that it's great, but instead of starting from scratch, I might only have to edit this letter, spend half an hour editing the letter have it to suit my needs, rather than spending 2 or 3 hours on something starting from scratch. So it's kind of a cool thing. I like just encourage you folks to go in and play around with it a little bit. So that's great. I know we went about 10 minutes over like talking time, but we really encourage folks that if you need any one-on-one support or would like to learn more about anything that we've talked to today, reach out to us. You send an email to Claire and schedule a time to chat, because we'd really be happy to talk with any of the project teams or project managers about how we can support you with your projects.